All right, it's 11:25. We will stay on time. So thank you everybody for coming. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to have Kyle Riley. Kyle is a licensed professional engineer and a certified floodplain manager. He is a water resources engineer with Snyder Associates. And he's going to be telling us about their work on the FEMA Floodplain Mapping.
Thank you, Tom. I told him that, oh, there we go. I'm not usually used to wearing these except in the fall because I officiate high school football. So if I don't talk into the microphone, let me know if you can't hear me. If you're here to talk about new data, old data, you're in the right place. But I changed the title a little bit because I started thinking about how I was going to talk about new data and old data and realized that after I woke up, it might not be the best idea to talk about graphs and spreadsheets because I was putting myself to sleep. So I changed it to FEMA Floodplain Mapping, a leverage study story. If you don't know what a leverage study is, you'll know what that is as I talk today, as I speak to you. But it sounds a little bit more West Side Story, a little bit more, maybe it's a story on 60 Minutes, maybe a little bit more dramatic. So I'll talk about a little my journey to get where I'm at, not necessarily to the conference, but where I'm at in my career. I'm going to tell you why I'm telling a story rather than talking about data. Then I'm going to talk about the Polk County FEMA mapping project that we did. The Polk County maps right now are preliminary, and we were a big part of getting a lot of that new updated data on those maps. And then I should have plenty of time for questions. I didn't want to be that guy that went through a bunch of slides at the end too. So I won't read it all. Got my MS and BS here at Iowa State, Ag Engineering, Civil Engineering. Ended up in Kansas City for 4 years with Watershed Concepts, which we got bought out by AECom. That was for 4 years down in downtown Kansas City, actually down in the Crown Center, if you've been down in Kansas City. I did nothing but FEMA floodplain mapping, whether it be the map making, the modeling, the hydrology, the hydraulics, reviewing of other engineers' work, both in Kansas City and out in California. Then I decided I want to move back to Iowa. We started a family, so I got a job with Snyder Associates in November 2010. And anything else about the projects I work on or anything that you want more detail on, go ahead and go out to LinkedIn. I try to keep that as up to date as I can, and you can read about some of the projects I've worked on. And when I was thinking about new data, old data, we could talk about CLOMARs and LOMARs and all that stuff. If you don't know what that is, come talk to me afterwards. There's plenty of acronyms we can talk about. Again, I thought that might be a little bit too nitty-gritty in the weeds, details. Or we could talk about the FEMA internal processes, or processes, however you want to say it. I did that for 4 years. It's really long, tedious. Scott Ralston right here knows all too well.
They keep changing their process.
Yeah, exactly. So decided we probably shouldn't talk about that either. So I could also talk about our project and go data, and more data. Spreadsheets for days that you can't read on the screen, or hydrographs that we could talk about. But I didn't want to go that route either. So FEMA floodplain mapping in Polk County, Iowa. It's where Des Moines, central Iowa is, most populous county in the state. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the timeline. So we all know that a lot of the flood studies around the country, Iowa, some counties don't even have data. Some counties don't have digital data, let alone mapping, actual maps or paper maps. A lot of those studies were done in the 80s and 90s, sometimes older. I've looked at plenty of models from 1976, 1977, and those need to be updated. So FEMA allocated money for map modernization, if you don't know the history, in the early 2000s, mid-2000s. So their goal was to take all these paper maps and get them into GIS digital data. So along with that, there was all these old models from the 70s and 80s that they wanted now to update, especially around population centers. Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, stuff like that. Then in Polk County, or in 2009, Polk County was going to they had their maps go preliminary in this map modernization process. The problem is that FEMA decided, well, maybe we're not mapping things in and around levees very well. Maybe we're not analyzing those all that well. So it wasn't right before, but it was pretty close. Polk County's maps went effective. FEMA said, time out. We're not letting those go effective. We're going to put a moratorium on any counties that involve levees that have not gone effective yet. Polk County was one of them. I happened to be in Kansas City at the time, so of course, a bunch of people I know from Des Moines are calling me, asking me what's going on. I was like, I don't know. I'm not the one doing the maps. At least at the time I wasn't. So between 2009 and about 2013, the good thing is that a lot of these communities saw what the maps were going to be updated to, and they wanted to try to plan for that. They also wanted to start mapping areas that might have development in the future. They also wanted to map areas or remap areas that wanted to be more accurate for planning purposes. Between 2009 and 2013, Snyder did a lot of approximate, detailed, limited detailed studies all over the county. Then in about fall 2013, before that, FEMA decided, okay, we're good. We know how we're going to deal with levies. So Polk County, go ahead. Oh wait, we did find some money too, so we can't actually go preliminary again. So the way that process worked is that they already did a lot of the updating to the data and to the maps, but they want to do a data discovery period again, which they have to do legally before they go preliminary. That they wanted to make sure that if there was any data since 2009 that they wanted to get on the maps, that they wanted to get on the maps before they went actually preliminary and effective. So we started communicating with FEMA immediately in the fall of 2013, saying, hey, we have all this data, we want to get it on the maps. So this is where a leverage study comes into play. There is the FEMA process where they go through and they actually do the work, and they are the ones that hire a contractor to put the data on the maps. Or what's called leverage study is a local community, whether it be a county or a city, or sometimes a tribal area. They actually put their own money in, hire a contractor of their own fruition. They do the modeling, they do the mapping, they get updated modeling and data that goes on the map, but FEMA didn't have to pay for it. So they are leveraging in that data with their local dollars, with their local effort. So basically we had, I'm not going to show the spreadsheet, we had probably 30 or 40 reaches that we had studied, whether it be approximate up to detailed, that we wanted to leverage into that map. So we're trying to communicate with FEMA to see if we can leverage those in and see if they have enough money to map it. So basically, we spent the money and the community spent the money to produce that data, but we got to make sure that FEMA has the money to actually update those reaches on the map. Right now they already had data, now we want to replace that data. Do they have enough money to replace the old data with our new data, our new leverage data? So fast forward to March 28th, 2014. Again, we had been talking to them in September, October 2013, and they said, okay, well, we'll look at it. And then we didn't hear anything, we didn't hear anything, we didn't hear anything. So finally, it was a Friday morning, I was sitting in a gentleman's office that works with me at Snyder Associates. We were talking about a different project. He gets a call from their mapping contractor that was going to do the map production and says, yep, you know what, you can go ahead and get all that data you want on that map. There's some nuances to it, but we need it by May 16th. All your data by May 16th. Whoa, okay. You have that kind of moment where you realize you might be in over your head. But in the fall, we had sent out a memo to all the jurisdictions that we had done work for in Polk County, saying, okay, this is what's going on. We have data we can put on the maps, but hey, we can also produce some more data to get some more data on the map in that time frame, because we had plenty of time. It was October. But now we have 7 weeks to get data in, and all these clients said, oh yeah, okay, cool. Okay, there's way more to do and not enough time, so there's some decisions we'll talk about later. But when I say we had data that we could update, we had updated some models with detailed data. If you've not seen a floodplain map before, you'll see some data. It's called a detailed study, it has a floodway through it. We had updated a detailed study, but we hadn't run the floodway for it. So if we want to replace data on the FEMA map, we have to replace it with the same amount of detail that's on there. So if we have a detailed study and we don't have a floodway, we can't update the floodplain mapping regardless of us having more up-to-date data if we don't have a floodway. So we had to do some production before we actually got it on the maps. A lot of the work was along 4 Mile Creek from Des Moines River all the way up to the Story County line, Mud Creek in Altoona, and Walnut Creek from the mouth all the way up to the Dallas County line, and numerous tributaries of all those. Okay, so decisions. This is the decision-making process we had. So, new areas. Is there going to be development within the time horizon? When I say time horizon, I mean some of these maps haven't been updated since the 80s, so that's 30 years ago. Do you think there's going to be development in this area between now and 2046? Because given the current timeline, who knows what's going to happen in Washington and whether or not they get updated maps or not. So if you think it's going to be, development's going to get there in 15 years, you need to think about mapping that stuff now and get it on the map now, because it's going to be the easiest and cheapest it's ever going to be. Upgrade or update approximate data. So approximate data doesn't have elevations to it. It doesn't have a floodway. It's just kind of a guideline. Here's probably where the 100-year boundary is going to be if it floods. So do we want to upgrade that to a detailed study? Because development's going to get there. We want elevations. We want a floodway. Stuff like that. Or do we want to update the approximate data? A lot of the Iowa Flood Center stuff is updating that. But is there areas that the Flood Center's not going to do, or that has been mapped in the past that's just really awful? No offense to the people that mapped them 10, 20, 30 years ago. I used to do FEMA map production. Some of the areas you just kind of, you're in Kansas City and you're mapping an area in South Carolina. You can't ground truth anything. I'll tell you that much right now. But the good thing is we were local. We could go out and check things out, at least as much as we could. So do we want to update those approximate boundaries and make them look better? Updated detailed studies. So 4 Mile Creek, from the mouth all the way to Story County, it was already a detailed study. But what we did is update it with new hydrology, hydraulics, new mapping data, and make sure it was the most up-to-date that it could be at the time of the map. So decisions. This was a detailed study. If you look at this map, the red line is the effective floodway, and the blue polygon is the effective 100-year or 1% annual chance boundary. And this blue line here is the current stream line. This is Mud Creek over by Altoona. As you can tell, these are areas that we targeted big time for updated detailed studies. Because if you look, this stream line actually goes outside the floodway. This is about pretty close to going outside the floodway. That's a problem. Obviously, it's development restricted in the floodway, but not necessarily out here. Legally, I mean, yeah, obviously, somebody looking at this will say, well, it's outside the floodway, so maybe we should modify how we're going to look at this. But at the same time, if somebody comes in and wants to sell it or develop it, they're not going to necessarily see that the same way. This is the same stream. Again, you can see it going outside the floodway big time over here. However, if you go up here, in 2 places, it goes outside the 100-year boundary completely. Just because of the slopes over here, we went and checked this out. It's pretty steep over there, and the stream's migrating. So if you're not going to update this boundary, then your stream line's going to be outside the 100-year. And now we got an even bigger problem than it being outside the floodway. So we went ahead and remapped this area as well. Decisions again. This is a detailed study on North Walnut Creek over in Urbandale. So the biggest issue with this is when we eventually did our hydrology, and hydrology being how much flows actually in the creek. So if you look at a watershed, you have this big pear shape. We'll just make it a pear because it's easy. And you're looking at the data. Once we updated the hydrology at the mouth of the creek, it was about the same. It wasn't all that much different. However, what we saw in the effective data is they had 2 flow change locations. So look at it this way. You have square miles of drainage area, and you have a flow down here at the mouth of the river. But then 2 miles upstream, they're mapping this floodplain, which is the red dashed line, the effective 100-year or 1% annual chance floodplain, with the same flow 2 miles upstream that they were at the mouth of the river. Now, the hydrology at the mouth wasn't all that off. It wasn't all that different than what we got. It was pretty close. But at the same time, if you're going to use the flow from the mouth 2 miles upstream, that's not necessarily all that accurate, let alone precise. So when we did our updated hydrology, we actually had multiple flow change locations where we had 5, 6 different areas where we were actually cutting the watershed a little bit more in detail. So we were mapping more accurate flows through here. And with the LiDAR data that we were using, it actually reflected some of this development around here. So the topography was a lot different. These red lines were mapped on 30-meter DEM data with 10-foot contours, 20, 25 years ago. So we went ahead and updated the hydrology and hydraulics with the new flows and new flow change locations, but we also went ahead and updated the mapping on this reach as well. This is even a bigger difference. This is Karen Acres Creek in Urbandale. This is a fully urbanized area. The headwaters of Karen Acres Creek is near the Urbandale High School area, Merle Mall. So the same problem here. This was an approximate study, but all these houses were mapped in, and this is again probably a mile and a half, I think, upstream of the mouth, and this is an approximate study. So there's no elevations, no floodway, but for the entire reach, the previous approximate study used one flow at the mouth, and it used that flow and mapped those flows, or that flow with those elevations throughout the entire reach. So instead of at least having two, they only had one, and they didn't necessarily have any of the updated. There's a little bit more development upstream. There was one small detention basin that the approximate hydrology didn't take into account. But by and large, we talked to these people with all the intense rainfalls we've been having. All the way down the reach, we targeted people that had complained to the city about their floodplain boundary. They had photos that we could look at, stuff like that. So when we actually got into the nitty-gritty and walked their backyards, and they'd show us where it flooded, this is pretty accurate to where they said they've seen the water, and pictures to show where that water's flooding up to. So with this being a mile and a half upstream, using one flow at the base wasn't as accurate as it should be. So again, the flows at the base, when we did our hydrology, it was pretty close. It just wasn't as accurate as it needed to be because the hydrology flow change weren't very precise.
Kyle,
Yes.
Is that purple area the correct?
Yes, sorry. The red dash line is the effective. The blue polygon, bluish, purplish polygon is our mapped 100-year floodplain, and the blue line is the current stream.
When you said that pretty much accurately reflected the extent of flooding that people had experienced, are you talking about the edges of the blue, or are you talking about the
edges of the blue, yes.
Thank you.
The red line, nobody, even the people that said we're trying to coordinate with or cooperate with the city, they said yes, they have had massive flooding. When I'm talking massive flooding, I'm talking this people up here with maybe a little bit smaller culvert, so it backwaters a little bit behind that. And this was pretty. They said, yeah, we've had good flooding, but it's never gotten up on our pad. And that was over. They'd lived there for 15, 16 years, and we'd had some pretty good intense rainfall, especially in the metro over that time period. And all their photos showed about that amount of flooding. Go ahead.
Kyle, was that an area that the Iowa Flood Center did, or did you guys do that approximate zone?
We did that, and Stantec was the mapping partner. So what they did is they took our approximate data and used ours over Iowa Flood Center because, fortunately or unfortunately, the Iowa Flood Center stuff doesn't include structures, which you know. So even with our approximate studies, they can almost be called a limited detailed study because we did do structure survey. We have HEC-RES models that include the bridges and culverts. When I used to do FEMA floodplain mapping down in Kansas City, when we do an approximate study, we just throw a cross section on top of that roadway, and we don't have survey on the structures. But when we do a limited detail or a detailed study, we have survey in the channel and in the structures. But when we did approximate studies, as far as what our clients wanted, they wanted the structures. So even though it was going to be an approximate boundary, they wanted that approximate boundary to be as accurate as possible.
Now that's the 100-year storm.
Correct.
You're showing.
Correct. This is in the
Looks
head.
like in a nutshell.
This is in the headwaters, so it's a little bit more extreme.
Right. But the old mapping is extremely conservative.
Correct.
Is that what you found?
Correct. There's some more areas where it wasn't as conservative just because there's been more development. There's areas where it got bigger. I just want to show the most extreme areas.
Okay.
Look at it this way. When you're talking about risk, when you're talking about people's lives being at risk, their structures, their home, their belongings, you want to be a little bit more conservative. And I understand they got to buy flood insurance, but at the other side of it, from a city perspective, I want to make sure that people understand the risk and not understand that yes, there's a creek behind them that might flood. And from FEMA's perspective, they're in the red. There's been plenty of legislation passed that's trying to get the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, more solvent. They're trying to move to actuarial rates, which is providing a lot of headaches one way or the other. But at the same time, they are going to err on the side of more than less, just because they want to make sure people aren't in harm's way.
What was the public official's reaction to that, correct?
They knew it was wrong, and that's why they hired us to change it. They didn't want that anymore because they knew it was wrong. Because he just retired actually, but the community official for the city of Urbandale had been there for 30 years, and he'd never seen flooding like that. So, and everybody says that, but for this particular point, it was accurate. People said that about 4 Mile Creek until it flooded twice. People said that about Walnut Creek until it had the 50-year flood just last summer, or not last summer, last summer. So it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I had a question in the back.
Yeah, what did you use for your hydrology? Did you use HEC1 or did you use
No.
stats?
We used detailed HEC HMS models. We did not use stream stats.
Rainfall runoff?
Yes, rainfall runoff models for HEC HMS. We actually updated. We were going to update a HEC1 model for North Walnut Creek, but then we found some errors in it. Well, at least we felt we found some errors, so we updated that to a HEC HMS model and went from there. Decisions, again, highly urbanized. So, yeah, we looked at some proximate areas that are in residential areas. This is Walnut Creek and Clive. So Clive is a big, long, skinny community, and Walnut Creek runs right through it. Throughout Clive, there's a lot of commercial, but there's a lot of residential. They have a green belt now. Not now. They've had the longest serving green belt in the metro, but they didn't care whether it was better or worse. They wanted it accurate. They want to make sure they can plan for their community, plan for their residents as accurate as possible. So Walnut Creek, you make that comment, Walnut Creek is one of the creeks that in particular, there were spots where they were lower, but there was more spots where it was higher than lower. Think about Walnut Creek. The last time they did a detailed hydrology was 20, 30 years ago. Think of the amount of development that's happened in West Des Moines, in the western part of the metro, in that time period. So there's the flows went up from our analysis, which are accurate to the gauge data that we saw. In areas it could have went down a tenth of a foot, went up a foot. There's places where it went up 1.5 feet. So, and the crazy part is the mapping didn't change all that much. The elevations did in spots, but the mapping was pretty close to what it was before in a lot of areas. In a lot of areas, yeah, it was slightly different, but for the most part, some areas were pretty close to what it was mapped before. Because whether it's, when you get into that 5 feet to 10 feet of flood flow, yeah, you're going to have a big difference. But when you're going from 12 feet to 13 feet of flood flow, it's going to go up against a bluff or something like that, so the extent of the floodplain isn't going to be as much as you go into those higher areas. And this hatch line is the floodway that we calculated. The blue is the 100-year, the red line is the 500-year, and the green lines are just the cross sections that we had within HEC-RES. So in the old maps, HEC2, you go out and survey a cross section from stem to stern, and you go. In the new day and age, we got LiDAR data thanks to the Iowa DNR in the state of Iowa. But we go in there and we survey some channel cross sections, survey bridges, and out here in the overbanks, LiDAR data is pretty darn accurate. So we don't have to have only one cross section every 2,000 feet. We can lace that thing with as many cross sections as we want, and it doesn't cost all that much. Developing soon. This is an area over by Altoona. This is that Mud Creek area that I was talking about. Altoona knows development's coming. It might not be in the next 5 years, but maybe with the new outlet mall that's going in Altoona. But at the same time, again, that time horizon, if it's going to happen in 15 years, now's the time. It needs to be accurate now because it's going to be the cheapest now. You don't have to pay for some of the fees that you would have to later. You just pay us to develop the new boundary, give it to FEMA, and then FEMA does what they do. So there's the story. So here's the story behind the story. This is the only data I'm going to give you today. Just because it's interesting, I'm supposed to tell you why the story of how the maps get made are more interesting than the actual maps themselves. We mapped over 30 miles of new detailed study in 7 weeks. It was a little bit of a struggle to get all that done. thankfully, a lot of the approximates that we got onto the map, we had already done, or we just needed to do certain parts to fill in the gaps. Over 60 miles of floodway modeling. So 4 Mile Creek was the creek that I told you that we had a detailed study for, but we didn't have a floodway. And all of a sudden we got to do a floodway for it. So from the mouth to Story County line was about 26 miles. So we had to do a floodway model for the entire reach of 4 Mile Creek to get it updated onto the map. So that makes up most of the extra 30 miles. The other 4 miles was on Mud Creek. 17 weeks worth of work completed in 7 weeks. So based on our scopes and contracts and the amount of people we had, it should have taken us 17 weeks to get it done. I spent a lot of time at the office. I slept at the office twice. There's a point where you're at the office at 2 in the morning and you think, I don't know if I should go home. I'm going to waste time. You get into crunch time and you know it's due. Luckily, Snyder Associates has a shower facility, so I was at least able to shower, even though I was putting on the same clothes. Laptop. I kept one laptop perpetual hostage. I didn't have a laptop in my office, but we have some pretty good floater laptops, mainly floodway modeling. I took the laptop home for Walnut Creek and Mud Creek. So I took it on vacation once. Sorry, Miranda, which is my wife. And then one birthday blow up. My birthday's on May 15th. It was due on May 16th. May 15th, I'm sitting there at it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, and IT sends out an email that says, well, we're going to shut down the server tonight, we're going to do updates. So I emailed him back and said, no, you're not. Then he walked over to my office, because we were in an office right next to each other. It's like, no, we're shutting the server down, we have to. There's these updates coming. It's like, no, you don't understand, you can't. I have this thing due tomorrow. So I was still there at like 11 o'clock that night, trying to finish some stuff up. And he came in and said, hey, well, I'm shutting down the server. I said, no, you can't. So then I got a call from management saying, please go home, we're shutting down the server, come back at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's when it's going to be up. It wasn't back up until 8:46 in the morning, because I made sure to write that down. The good thing is 5 minutes, good. The good thing is at about 2 o'clock the next day, we did make the submittal, May 16, 2014. Had I known that FEMA was going to delay things a month later, because they were trying to, in the FEMA process, they have 18 months from preliminary to effective. So they wanted it effective by December 2017. Back calculate that, which is why the 7-week time frame, we had to get it in by May and do all their stuff so they could go preliminary in May 2015, because they wanted, or December 2016, sorry. So, but they delayed their process a month later, so now it's not going to go effective until January 2017. Had I known that, I would have negotiated being due by June 16th instead of May 16th. But FEMA did their thing. They delayed their stuff a month for multiple reasons. So they went preliminary in June 2015. They're preliminary right now. And FEMA's long, arduous process, 18 months later, is magically January 2017 for a letter of final determination. And all that preliminary data, whether it be the digital data, the mapping data, the FIS reports, not the engineering data, you'll have to talk to Bill Capucci of the Iowa DNR for that, or your local community. You can go out to msc.fema.gov, you can download that all right now. It's all on my servers because I keep getting questions. And then that's us having a little fun during Halloween. And none of those are me, because I'm not tall enough to be in any of those outfits. I want at least one question.
Well, you had
Because I've already had
nice,
questions.
but let's go, yeah.
But now that I've ended, now there's got to be at least one more.
You heard him, he wants one more question. Who's going to do it?
I'll do it.
Okay, go.
Are you hiring soon?
Are we hiring soon?
Yes.
I have two EIs starting this summer. If that.
Fair enough. That's my one question.
Okay. I have an EI starting in May and one in June. Yes, Scott.
Is this in appeal period right now?
It is. The 90-day comments, appeals, and protest period has started. If you want to appeal it, don't appeal any of ours, of course. You have to actually have engineering data. Unfortunately, people can't just say they don't like it. You have to actually appeal with data, with new data or updated data or data you feel is better. A comment is like, hey, this road label's wrong, our corporate boundary is wrong. A protest is something you give, maybe you should look into this, and then me as somebody that mapped it, or Stantec as the mapping contractor, or FEMA themselves, will now research that protest and tell you, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong. Being the management center in Kansas City for a while, I did a lot of protest research, and unfortunately we gave a lot of no, you're wrongs, but that's okay.
All right, thank you, Kyle, very much. David, thank you as well. Lunchtime, gang.